The entire venue fell silent. Around the punishment platform, countless students stood with their mouths agape, staring at the scene before them. The massive demonic pillar stood silently, its overwhelming aura of death spreading, emitting terrifying waves of power. At the base of the pillar, 3 battle puppets were trapped, unable to move, losing all the might they once possessed. The battle had clearly ended much faster than anyone had expected. They had originally thought there would be an intense fight, but they never anticipated that Mo Xingtian would summon a demonic pillar and suppress the 3 battle puppets with ease. The crowd gazed at the cracked ground beneath the demonic pillar, slightly stunned. These were 3 battle puppets that were comparable to the late heaven-reaching stage, and they were solved just like that. That's incredible. The crowd was speechless. They looked at the top of the demonic pillar, where a slender young man stood proudly, his feet on the pillar. His imposing aura left many young girls staring at him with admiration. Mu Bro is so powerful. Members of the Luo God Society also came back to their senses, unable to suppress their awe. Their faces were filled with excitement. The momentary suppression of the 3 battle puppets was truly dazzling. Luo Li also stared at the figure, a faint smile appearing at the corner of her lips. At a distance, Su Linger watched the young man standing calmly on the massive demonic pillar amidst the cheers. Her face flushed slightly. For a girl just beginning to experience emotions, this scene was undoubtedly overwhelming. "What's this? Are you smitten?" Su Xin teased. Su Linger blushed, then glanced at Luo Li not far away, pouting slightly. Facing such a formidable opponent, she really lacked confidence. That guy really is impressive. When we first went on a mission together, even Bai Xian nearly had him in a life-or-death situation. But now, 3 battle puppets comparable to the late heaven-reaching stage were easily subdued by him. Su Xian couldn't help but marvel at Mu Qin's rapid progress. Mu Qin now probably has the ability to challenge for the top of the heavenly ranking, Su Linger whispered. But why hasn't he done it? If he did, he'd truly become the most famous person in our Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Su Xian smiled gently. Because he doesn't care about the so-called top of the heavenly ranking. Besides, he might not want to take Shan Songxing's position. Men, especially outstanding ones like them, have a mutual respect for each other. Su Linger nodded lightly and didn't speak further. A little further away, Shan Songxing and Li Xiantong, compared to the surrounding cheers, seemed a bit more silent. They stared at the figure on the demonic pillar, their expressions becoming complex. "Looks like this time, we've truly been surpassed," Shen Songxing finally sighed, shrugged his shoulders, and smiled casually. Li Xiantong nodded gently, for they both knew that if they were facing those 3 battle puppets, they would most likely have been defeated with no hope of achieving the same stunning result that Mu Qin had. The once newcomer had now truly surpassed them. Perhaps, the former heavenly ranking champion would have to yield his position. He had competed with Shan Songxing for so long in the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, but now, a newcomer had surpassed both of them consecutively. Although they had somewhat anticipated this, the feeling when it finally happened was still complex. After all, they too were proud. "But I won't just give up like this." Shan Songxing smiled faintly. He looked at the distant figure, his eyes becoming even more determined. Giving up easily was not his style. Li Xiantong also smiled lightly, his long fingers crossed, and there was no sign of defeat in his eyes. On the punishment platform, Headmaster Tong of the Grand Song Academy slowly came back to his senses. Their expressions were somewhat odd. No one had expected Mu Qin to pass the final test in such a stunning manner. Headmaster Tong fixed his gaze on Mu Qin, then smiled and said, "Congratulations, you've passed the final test. As promised, you will represent our Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy in the Sacred Spirit Mountain and compete with the true top geniuses of the younger generation from the Northern Song continent." Wow! As Headmaster Tsong's words fell, the entire sky erupted in a deafening cheer. Countless students' faces were filled with excitement. After many years, their Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy would finally participate in the grand event that represented the top young talents of the Northern Song continent. Mu Bro, go for it. Knock out those so-called geniuses and let them know that we, Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, didn't want to play with them before, but when we do, we can crush them. Mu Chun, the senior sisters are all supporting you. Sounds echoed from all around, and it was clear that the students were somewhat excited. The headmaster of Grand Song Academy gazed at the enthusiastic students with a helpless smile. His expression shifted slightly as he noticed some of the quieter faces in the crowd. Among them were Shan Songxing, Li Xiantong, He Yao, and other former top students of North Song Academy. Once the academy's celebrated figures, they now seemed to have been overshadowed by Mu Qin's rising brilliance. Except for Shan Songxing and Li Xiantong, others appeared slightly disheartened, clearly affected by the situation. With a gentle wave of his hand, the headmaster gradually quieted the roaring applause. His hands behind his back, he slowly spoke, "Students, I wonder if you are aware of the current state of North Song Spiritual Academy?" The question from the headmaster caught many students off guard, their expressions blank with confusion. Over the past few years, our North Song Spiritual Academy has ranked at the bottom of the 5 great academies in the Spiritual Academy tournament. In fact, some of the top spiritual academies have already surpassed us. If things continue this way in this year's competition, we may even lose our place among the 5 great academies. The headmaster's low voice stunned countless students, who felt a wave of deep shame. As they once prided themselves on being part of the 5 great academies, they had forgotten about the precarious position of North Song Spiritual Academy. Now, let me clarify, the headmaster continued. This isn't to say our students lack talent. It's simply that our academy does not employ extreme methods like some other spiritual schools. Here at North Song Spiritual Academy, all students are given equal conditions for cultivation. No matter your background, your identity here is that of a North Song Spiritual Academy student. We will not offer special privileges based on someone's status. Therefore, we cannot attract top geniuses with lavish rewards that place them above others. Sometimes, this means our performance naturally falls behind. With his hands behind his back, the headmaster stood tall, appearing mighty in the eyes of countless students. His deep and powerful voice echoed in everyone's ears. I know that North Song Spiritual Academy is not your final destination. You will eventually leave to pursue greater challenges, hone your skills, and fight in bigger arenas. However, I hope that every student, even after leaving, will remain proud of having been part of North Song Spiritual Academy. As long as you don't forget that you were once one of us, no matter how far you go, North Song will always be your final sanctuary. The entire academy will stand behind you. The entire academy fell silent. All the students, even the mentors and elders, gazed into the distance, their hearts stirred by the towering figure of the headmaster. He was the pillar of North Song Spiritual Academy. Some students, especially the more emotional young women, had tears in their eyes, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride in being part of North Song Spiritual Academy. It wasn't about the academy's reputation, but the warmth they felt from the academy and its leader. Mu Qin also stared at the headmaster, lips slightly pursed before a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He was glad he had chosen to cultivate at North Song Spiritual Academy. A leader who could speak of the entire academy standing behind you wasn't someone you came across every day. The headmaster looked at the students with rare warmth in his expression. He spoke slowly. Of course, I also hope you remember what North Song Spiritual Academy has taught you. It's not just about strength, but about never giving up, no matter the challenges we face. Even if after this year's tournament, we no longer remain one of the 5 great academies, we will never give up. He Yao, Su Huang, Zhao Qingshan, and other top students from North Song Spiritual Academy trembled slightly, their previously dimmed expressions now shining brightly with renewed determination. Clap, clap, clap. Thunderous applause erupted, as loud as a storm, with countless students looking excited. It was the first time they had heard their usually serious and unsmiling headmaster speak such inspiring words. In the sea of people, Shen Songxing and Li Xiantong also smiled. Then, amidst the deafening applause, Shen Songxing slowly stepped forward, all eyes immediately focusing on him. Headmaster, Shen Songxing looked at the headmaster and smiled. We certainly will not give up so easily. However, we also hope that you can trust us. We love North Song Spiritual Academy, and we are willing to fight for it. For example, Headmaster Cang of the Grand Song Academy asked, surprised. For example, reopening the North Song Gate. Shin Songxing straightened his back. His already tall and upright figure became even more straight at this moment, like a long spear piercing through the sky. Reopen the North Song Gate. When Shin Songxing's words floated through the air, it felt as though the very air itself had solidified for a moment. Headmaster Cang and the many elders' expressions slightly changed. Their gazes grew unclear, evidently not expecting Shin Songxing to propose such a request. The North Song Gate was the last trial ground for the Northern Song Spiritual Academy, but the death rate was so high that, after careful consideration, the Academy decided to close it. Without this crucial trial ground, the Northern Song Spiritual Academy's performance in recent years had declined, and its status as one of the 5 great academies was now in jeopardy. If the other spiritual academies used special methods to snatch top talents, that was an external factor. But the closing of the North Song Gate was an internal factor for the Northern Song Spiritual Academy. Many powerful spiritual academies have their ultimate training grounds, and these are extremely important because they allow top students to make remarkable breakthroughs. However, compared to the other 4 academies, the Northern Song Spiritual Academy had the shortest history, and some of its foundations were lacking. Mo Xingtian, who had been momentarily stunned by the sudden change in atmosphere, had only been at the Northern Song Spiritual Academy for a year. Naturally, he was unaware of the so-called North Song Gate. But from the expressions in Headmaster Cang and the elders' eyes, he could vaguely sense how special the North Song Gate was. The North Song Gate, it's too dangerous. Headmaster Cang murmured after a long silence. Headmaster, may I ask? Shin Songxing smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on Headmaster Cang. His voice was low and firm as he spoke slowly. Is the path of the strong ever smooth? The world fell silent. Only Shin Songxing's deep voice slowly echoed, making countless students gaze at his tall figure with admiration. They could not hide the respect in their eyes. This was Shin Songxing, the ruler of the heavenly ranking. Even though Mo Xingtian might gradually surpass him now, in the hearts of many students, his status remained unshakable. Mo Xingtian exhaled a puff of white air and gave Shin Songxing a thumbs up. Headmaster Cang was silent for a moment before he smiled helplessly, saying, I can't believe I've been lectured by a brat who's barely out of his diapers. Elder Xun'er and the others nearby also chuckled. The North Song Gate was incomplete before it was closed, and we've been trying to repair its flaws as much as possible. In these years, we've made some progress, but it is still extremely dangerous. Headmaster Cang looked at Shin Songxing and then smiled as he waved his hand. But since you've said it like that, if I keep making excuses, I might be accused of bringing this upon myself. Very well, the North Song Gate will be reopened, but there will be restrictions. Only students in the top 10 of the heavenly ranking can enter, and it will be entirely voluntary. Upon hearing this, a relieved smile appeared on Shin Songxing's face, and he laughed heartily. Then I apply to enter the North Song Gate. Count me in, Li Xinong said with a faint smile. Not far away, He looked at Shin Songxing and Li Xintong with their extraordinary demeanor, then turned his gaze toward Su Xian. A dark expression crossed his face, and gritting his teeth, he stood up. Count me in too. Yao's voice startled many people. Even Su Xian looked at him in surprise. However, her beautiful eyes remained calm, with no major change in her expression. Yao's actions during the hunt had clearly disgusted her. Although she had never liked Yao, she could at least communicate with him as an ordinary friend. After that incident, however, she had not interacted with him again, and they had become strangers. Yao kept his eyes on Su Xian. Seeing her indifferent gaze, his face grew more dejected. He knew he had been foolish back then, driven by a desire to defeat Mo Xingtian and redeem himself. But he had never intended to hurt Su Xian. The dean's words earlier were so moving. So I thought, let me also give my all and fight for the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy one last time. But if we don't enter the North Song Gate, we might be surpassed by the geniuses of other top academies. Yao smiled bitterly. He was actually quite handsome, though with a somewhat cold and gloomy aura. Still, There were many girls in the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy who were fascinated by him. "Well done, boss." The members of the Demon Gate looked at He Yao in surprise. This was clearly different from his usual shadowed demeanor, and it made them feel proud. He Yao's choice had brought them honor. "Rare to see him fired up like this," Su Linger said, surprised. She leaned towards Su Xian and whispered. Su Xian glanced at He Yao, and as their eyes met, He Yao's body subtly straightened. This time, he noticed that Su Xian's gaze wasn't as cold as usual. There was a slight, normal level of assessment in her eyes, and it made him quietly excited. The atmosphere of the entire Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy seemed to be stirred by Shen, Zongxing, Li Xiantong, and He Yao. Many students were eager to prove themselves, hoping to rank in the top 10 and truly fight for the honor of the academy. Su Huang smiled as he felt the atmosphere around him, his blood seemingly boiling. As a member of the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, he couldn't shrink back. Then, under the proud and admiring gaze of Su Qingqing, who stood nearby, he stepped forward. On the other side, Zhao Qingshan and Mu Fengyang exchanged a glance and both smiled wryly. Retreating at this point would be seen as weakness, and their pride wouldn't allow that. So, as Su Huang stepped forward, they did as well. Soon after, countless students were excited to see that, aside from Mu Chun, Lu Oli, and Su Xian, everyone in the top 10 of the heavenly ranking had stepped forward. The sight was electrifying, filling everyone with pride. Despite the usual factional struggles within the academy, moments like this, when everyone united, made them feel an overwhelming sense of honor. Gransong Academy Headmaster and many elders were watching this scene in surprise. After a moment, they exchanged wry smiles. But as they smiled, they also felt a deep sense of relief. When students were willing to fight for the glory of their spiritual academy, who could say this wasn't their success? Gransong Academy Headmaster raised his hand, calming the atmosphere, and smiled gently. 3 days from now, we'll take Mu Chan to Sacred Spirit Mountain. After this, the North Tsang Gate will reopen. Countless students cheered loudly. This time, everyone was giving their all to defend their Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy's position as one of the 5 great academies. Mu Chen looked at the passionate academy with a slight smile. His fingers slowly clenched into a fist. Since everyone was working so hard, he couldn't afford to fall behind. At least, when the Sacred Spirit Mountain event came, he would need to represent the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy and bring them honor. In the pitch-black massive hall, the atmosphere was cold and oppressive. At the top of the hall, Black Dragon Supreme suddenly opened his eyes. A cold light flickered in his gaze. He looked up toward the dark corners of the hall and said faintly, "The news is confirmed. The Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy will participate in the Sacred Spirit Mountain event, and the participant will be that Mu Chun, who obtained the Great Samara Demon Pillar." Heh, the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy really has guts. Those young punks from their academy actually dare to participate in such an event. In the darkness, a cold, glowing light appeared. A shadowy figure flickered in and out, and a sinister laugh echoed through the hall. "Let them come. Otherwise, how can we carry out our plans? We've been enduring for far too long," Black Dragon Supreme replied with a faint smile. "Everything is prepared, right? That old troublemaker from the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy is a real pain." A gloomy voice came from another corner. "Don't worry, that old bird will be dealt with," Black Dragon Supreme nodded, his eyes cold with malice. Slowly, he said, "This time, we'll show the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy that in the North Tsang continent, the most powerful will always be our Dragon Demon Palace. And the Great Sumeru Demon Pillar must be retrieved. It is the treasure of our Dragon Demon Palace." As soon as the words left his mouth, he waved his sleeve, and the space inside the great hall violently distorted. A spatial passage appeared, and from within it, the sharp, ear-piercing howls of countless demons echoed, as if 1,000 devils were roaring. Following this, a thin black figure slowly stepped out of the pitch-black passage. The figure wore simple linen clothes, and his appearance was quite ordinary. His eyes were grayish-black, resembling stagnant water with no fluctuation of emotion. On his back was a black spear, wrapped in twisting black shadows that screeched and howled like ghosts and wolves. He stood there motionless, like a cold, unfeeling boulder. Xingtian, 3 days from now, prepare to participate in the Sacred Spirit Mountain event. Your task is to kill Mo Xingtian of the Northern Song Spiritual Academy and retrieve the great Xun'er demon pillar he possesses. The Black Dragon Supreme gazed at the seemingly lifeless, stone-like figure and spoke slowly. The cold figure slightly raised his lifeless eyes, nodded faintly, and turned to leave, never uttering a word. Yet, the eerie silence sent a chill down one's spine. Senior Lingxi? Mo Xingtian looked at the alluring girl who had approached them, surprised, especially upon hearing her address Lingxi. Could she really know Lingxi? Mo Xingtian glanced at Lingxi in confusion, who smiled slightly and nodded towards the girl before speaking. She is the eldest daughter of the 9 Summer Chamber of Commerce, Xia Youran. Mo Xingtian's eyes widened in astonishment. Xia Youran? She was a well-known figure among the younger generation of the Northern Song continent. Moreover, her strength was probably even greater than that of the Devil Dragon Child. Senior Lingxi, it's been a long time. I never expected you'd be here as well. Is the Northern Song Spiritual Academy participating in the Sacred Spirit Mountain event too? Xia Youran seemed genuinely happy to see Lingxi here. The smile on her delicate face made her look even more radiant. Lingxi nodded gently and pointed at Mo Xingtian. This time, it's him participating. Oh. Xia Youran looked at Mo Xingtian in surprise, immediately noticing his early heaven-reaching stage cultivation. She paused for a moment. How could someone with this strength be here for the Sacred Spirit Mountain event? However, she didn't show her shock, instead smiling at Mo Xingtian. Hello, I'm Xia Youran. I suppose I'm your senior. Senior? Mo Xingtian was stunned again. Could Xia Youran be a student of their Northern Song Spiritual Academy? She studied at the Northern Song Spiritual Academy a few years ago for a year, but was recalled due to matters concerning the Chamber of Commerce. Strictly speaking, she can be considered your senior, Lingxi explained. Mo Xingtian then understood and smiled. Hello, Senior Xia. I am Mo Xingtian. Luoli, said Luoli, smiling slightly beside them. Mo Xingtian? Xia Yuran's bright eyes blinked, and she looked Mo Xingtian up and down, slightly surprised. Are you the one who defeated the Devil Dragon Child in Western Desolation City? Mo Xingtian hadn't expected this news to spread so quickly, but he nodded lightly. No wonder. Xia Youran now understood. The 9 Summer Chamber of Commerce was one of the top forces in the Northern Song continent, with an extraordinary intelligence network. So, she knew all about the events in Western Desolation City. At that time, Mo Xingtian seemed to be only at the late heaven-merging stage, but he had still defeated the Devil Dragon Child, who was at the late heaven-reaching stage. The gap between them was huge, but even their elders in the 9 Summer Chamber of Commerce were amazed. Still, the intelligence couldn't be wrong. Now, Mo Xingtian seemed even stronger than when he fought the Devil Dragon Child and had truly stepped into the heaven-reaching stage. Combined with his extraordinary combat abilities, he was not someone to be underestimated. Xia Youran felt some excitement as well. Having once trained at the Northern Song Spiritual Academy, she had an affinity for it. Now that the Academy was once again participating in such an important event, she was genuinely happy for them. I've heard much about you. Xia Youran extended her slender, fair hand toward Mo Xingtian with a smile. Don't worry. If anything comes up during the Sacred Spirit Mountain event, come find me. I'll protect you. Mo Xingtian smiled as well, shaking her hand. He felt some goodwill towards this lively senior, Sister Lingxi. I didn't expect you to join this time. You used to be so indifferent to the matters of the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Xia Youran, with her lively and cheerful personality, quickly became familiar with Mo Xingtian and the others after their introduction. She sat beside Lingxi, looking very close to her. Lingxi, in turn, was quite approachable, her usual aloofness replaced by warmth. The 3 women gathered together, their beauty and radiance standing out in the mixed crowd of the loft. They undoubtedly became the center of attention in this chaotic environment. However, those present who had sharp eyes soon recognized Xia Yuran's identity, and their expressions turned cautious. After all, Xia Yuran's name was well known among the younger generation of the North Song continent. Furthermore, With her status as the young mistress of the 9 Summer Chamber of Commerce, few dared to offend her. Thanks to Xia Youran's presence, some people also started to notice Mo Xingtian. In such places, information spread quickly, and through hushed whispers, people began to learn about their identities. They even managed to dig up his name. After all, Mo Xingtian had gained some renown in the North Tsang continent after the battle at Western Desolation City. Though he might not yet be as famous as Xia Youran, a top figure among the younger generation, he was no longer an unknown person. They're from the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy, right? Heh, I didn't expect the Northern Heavens Spiritual Academy, which has been absent for so many years, to dare participate in the sacred Spirit Mountain. Aren't they afraid their geniuses and ivory towers will be killed again? That young man seems unusual. His name should be Mo Xingtian, right? I've heard of him. He defeated the Devil Dragon Child from the Dragon Demon Palace in Western Desolation City. No way. He doesn't seem that strong. The Devil Dragon Child should have reached the late heaven-reaching stage, right? That's exactly why I say he's no ordinary person. The one from the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy attending the Sacred Spirit Mountain must be him. Think about it. If he wasn't capable, would the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy allow him to come? Then, it's time to see what he's really capable of. Within the loft, whispers spread, some with goodwill, others with malice. As these whispers filled the air, in the corners hidden by screens, some eyes were directed toward the area where Mo Xingtian and the others were sitting. The owners of these gazes were clearly no ordinary people. Even upon seeing Xia Youran, their expressions didn't show fear. Instead, they seemed to be watching with amusement. Is this the guy who defeated the Devil Dragon Child? Behind a screen, a man in a gray robe played with the teacup in his hand and smiled lightly. His fingers were long, and as he moved them, it seemed like shadows were crawling across the table, creating an eerie effect. I heard so. Beside the gray-robed man sat another man in a yellow robe, who smiled and said, "What's wrong? Does young Master Lu not like him? Oh, it seems Xia Youran is your fiancée, right? And now, that young man is so close to her. Given young Master Lu's personality, he must be upset." Heh, a little upset, yes. The gray-robed man merely smiled faintly. His gaze was dark. He was the young master of the Shadow Chamber of Commerce, one of the top 3 commercial organizations in the North Tsang continent. He even had a verbal engagement with Xia Youran, though it seemed she had no intention of fulfilling it. Being a man with a strong sense of possessiveness, seeing Xia Youran smiling happily beside a young man stirred some coldness in his heart. Then, why not take action and teach him a lesson? He's just a kid in the early heaven-reaching stage. The man in the yellow robe smiled. "Dong Yuan, don't try to set me up." The gray-robed man smiled and replied, "I'm not stupid. Though this kid isn't anything impressive, he's from the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. The Shadow Chamber of Commerce may be one of the top forces in the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, but we can't compare to them." While they could mock the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy for not participating in the Sacred Spirit Mountain all these years, everyone knew deep down that the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy was a massive power. The only force in the entire North Tsang continent that could match them was the Dragon Demon Palace. In such a situation, it would be foolish to make a move against someone from the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Lu Ying wasn't an idiot. No matter what, it was better to wait until they entered the Sacred Spirit Mountain. Once inside, even if he killed that young man named Mo Xingtian, the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy would have to bear the consequences. I still need to figure out how to secure one of those limited spots for the Sacred Spirit Baptism. It looks like there are a lot of people here this time. Lu Ying shrugged helplessly and said, Mo Xingtian from the Dragon Demon Palace, Shi Qinghai from the West Pole Temple, Zhou Xian from Mysterious Yin Mountain, Su Buxiu from the Heavenly Cauldron Sacred Sect, plus Xia Youran and you, the young master of the Tianyuan Chamber of Commerce. It'll be hard to break through the competition. The Sacred Spirit Baptism, I won't let anyone take it from me. Dong Yuan, the young master of the Tianyuan Chamber of Commerce, also smiled. However, a trace of unease flashed in his eyes, and he murmured, "The physical body tribulation is terrifying enough. If the spiritual energy tribulation isn't guaranteed, I really wouldn't dare to risk it." Lu Ying smiled lightly, about to speak, when his expression suddenly changed slightly. He sensed a chilling fluctuation suddenly emanating. Dong Yuan's eyes narrowed as he turned his head towards the door, whispering, "That guy's here." An indescribable feeling of eerie coldness spread like ripples, causing the noise in the area to gradually fade. Many people's faces shifted as they looked towards the door. The light in that direction seemed to darken, and then a figure, like a ghost, appeared. It seemed as though no one noticed how he had arrived. The figure was a man dressed in simple coarse clothes. His features were unremarkable, but his eyes, like a stagnant pool of water, showed no signs of emotion, sending a cold shiver down one's spine. Yet, such an ordinary figure caused the entire area to fall silent. Many young, strong individuals from all directions showed expressions of dread and fear. The man's Deadpool-like eyes slowly swept over the crowd, then paused. Everyone watched as he took a step forward, and the crowd immediately parted to make way. His path extended to the area where Mo Xingtian and the others were. The man in coarse clothes stood in front of Mo Xingtian, his lifeless eyes devoid of any emotion, yet they radiated a chilling presence. Mo Xingtian's gaze tightened, his body tensing. Spiritual energy surged within him. From the man before him, he felt an overwhelming sense of danger. This feeling was even more intense than the one he had felt from the devil dragon child. His eyes grew colder as he stared at this ominous figure, but deep inside, he had a faint suspicion about the man's identity. Beside Mo Xingtian, Luo Li's delicate hand also gripped the sword hilt, ready to strike if the man made any move. "What do you want, Mo Xingtian?" The first to speak was Xia Youran. She glared at the man before her, shouting angrily. Mo Xingtian. This name, already guessed, spread through the loft, causing some people to show signs of shock. In the current North Tsang continent, figures like Xia Youran and Lu Ying could be considered among the elite of the younger generation. However, everyone knew that among these top young talents, the most feared was probably Mo Xingtian of the Dragon Demon Palace. Although Mo Xingtian's appearance on the North Tsang continent had been much less frequent than the Devil Dragon Child's in the past year or two, his presence still made many young geniuses feel uneasy. For all these years, there had been no rumors of Mo Xingtian being defeated in battle. Of course, this was assuming the competition was among peers. In a way, Mo Xingtian could be considered the number one among the younger generation of the North Tsang continent. Though no rumors had spread to confirm this, everyone had their own internal scales, and certain things could still be assessed. Though geniuses from top forces like Xia Youran, Lu Ying, and Su Buxiu were outstanding, if asked who they truly feared among their generation, it was most likely Mo Xingtian. Faced with Xia Yuran's harsh words, Mo Xingtian's eyes remained unchanged. His Deadpool-like gaze only focused on Mo Xingtian, and his voice was devoid of emotion. "My mission this time is to kill you." A cold glint flashed in Luo Li's beautiful eyes. With a flick of her hand, the sword hummed as a sword energy shot out, striking directly towards Mo Xingtian without hesitation. Just as the sword energy was about to hit Mo Xingtian, a spiritual energy halo seemed to form around his body, directly blocking the strike. He shook his head and said, "Too weak? Is that so?" Luo Li's beautiful eyes turned icy, and her grip tightened on the sword, ready to act. However, she was stopped by Mo Xingtian's hand. She turned her head, and he shook his head at her. Then, he raised his eyes to look at the man before them, who gave off a heart-stopping presence, and smiled. "If you think you can kill me here, I'd say your brain must be broken." As his words fell, his gaze turned sharply cold, and his tone became as sharp as a blade. "Get lost." A low murmur of astonishment spread through the loft, and many people looked at Mo Xingtian in disbelief, clearly shocked that he dared speak to Mo Xingtian in such a manner. Mo Xingtian's dead, stagnant gaze seemed to flicker slightly, as if he were weighing the chances of successfully killing Mo Xingtian at that moment. Tap. He finally took a step forward, but as soon as his foot landed, his expression shifted slightly. He sensed a dangerous aura suddenly surge from the beautiful girl beside Mo Xingtian, who emanated a chilling indifference. His step faltered, and for the first time, a hint of solemnity appeared on his face. "Didn't he tell you to leave? Are you deaf?" The girl in the snow-white dress slowly lifted her delicate face, but her eyes now radiated an icy chill. Mo Xingtian's pupils contracted, and his face twitched when he saw the girl make her move. There was no grand display of power. The girl extended her slender jade hand, and with a sudden grasp, the surrounding space around Mo Xingtian began to collapse violently. Beams of light shot out from the space like a net, enveloping his body. As the light streaked through, black marks appeared in the space. An indescribable sense of danger surged in Mo Xingtian's heart. His body suddenly jerked back, and in that instant, it seemed as if he had become intangible. Before the light, which could tear through space itself, could reach him, he reappeared several meters behind. Mu Chen narrowed his eyes slightly. Mo Xingtian's movement technique was extraordinarily bizarre. In that split second, it was as if he had transformed from a solid form into a shadow. Still, this guy was strong. To be able to dodge an attack from Ling Shi, despite her not fully exerting herself, was impressive. Regardless, Ling Shi had the power to crush Mo Xingtian effortlessly. Humph! Ling Shi's brow furrowed as she saw her attack fail to take down Mo Xingtian. Clearly displeased, she slapped the table with her jade hand. Immediately, everyone felt a surge of spiritual energy rippling through the air. The space around Mo Xingtian distorted as though it had become a spatial prison, completely sealing him off. Spatial prison? Supreme powerhouse? Suddenly, astonished voices erupted throughout the building. Everyone gazed at Ling Shi in shock, their eyes filled with disbelief. It was clear they couldn't fathom that such a young girl possessed supreme-level strength. When Had North Tsang's Spiritual Academy produced such a terrifying student, Ling Shi paid no attention to the gasps around her. She flicked her jade finger, and a beam of light, compressed to its limit and resembling a crystal pillar, shot out from her fingertip. It pierced through the space, heading straight for Mo Xingtian's forehead, clearly intending to take his life. Once again, people around them trembled, shocked by the coldness of Ling Shi's attack. Mo Xingtian, trapped in the distorted space, couldn't move. He furrowed his brow as he watched the terrifying light beam shooting toward him, but there was no sign of fear on his face. Himph, you have some guts, daring to strike at a member of the Dragon Demon Palace? Just as the crystal beam was about to hit Mo Xingtian, a faint cold grunt suddenly echoed. Then, space shattered as if an ancient, withered hand had struck out, shattering the distorted space and flicking the light beam aside. The space rippled, and a figure in black robes appeared next to Mo Xingtian. It was the Black Dragon Supreme from the Dragon Demon Palace. His cold, sinister gaze locked onto Ling Shi as a terrifying pressure from his supreme power spread throughout the room, causing many young strong cultivators to change their expressions and quickly retreat. Ling Shi stepped forward, positioning herself in front of Mu Chen and the others. Her eyes gleamed with an icy intensity, and her slender jade fingers flickered with spiritual light. The air around her began to churn, and a powerful, almost tangible aura started to coalesce. You must be the elder from North Tsang's Spiritual Academy who specializes in spiritual formations, right? The Black Dragon Supreme observed the turbulent air around Ling Shi, his gaze sharpening. He then spoke indifferently. So you're an elder from North Tsang's Spiritual Academy. But you don't look much older than us. Someone with that level of strength shouldn't have trouble altering their appearance a bit. But something feels off. The Black Dragon Supreme's words caused a quiet sigh of relief from many in the room, though there was a lingering sense of unease. Could such a young Supreme really exist? If you are a senior elder of the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, then today, you must have broken the rules. The Black Dragon Supreme said with a cold and gloomy expression. Hee, we already warned this guy, but he insisted on taking action. Mu Chen chuckled lightly, though a hint of regret flashed across his face. He had deliberately provoked Mo Xingtian earlier, hoping he would make a move. That way, they would have a legitimate reason to act, and even if they killed him, it wouldn't matter. However, Mo Xingtian was indeed a tough opponent. His earlier step had been a test of their strength. What surprised him, though, was the unexpectedly strong power of Ling Shi. Where do you, a mere junior, have the right to speak? the Black Dragon Supreme coldly remarked. It was evident he had a strong distaste for Mo Xingtian, especially since the latter still held their Dragon Demon Palace's precious treasure. Hee, the Black Dragon Supreme really is impressive. You're even willing to fight with the disciples of our Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, came a light laugh. The space around Mo Xingtian shifted, and the headmaster of the Grand Song Academy, Taitsong, appeared. He smiled faintly at the Black Dragon Supreme. The Black Dragon Supreme glared at Taitsong with a cold gaze, sneering, Taitsong, I didn't expect you Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy would dare to participate in Sacred Spirit Mountain. What? Haven't the top-tier disciples who died in the past taught you enough of a lesson? Taitsong calmly met the Black Dragon Supreme's gaze and replied indifferently, the Sacred Spirit Mountain has yet to begin. Don't be too proud now, or you might regret your words later. Is that so? Well, I'll be watching closely, the Black Dragon Supreme sneered. His gaze flickered over Mo Xingtian before he shook his head. Do you really think defeating the Devil Dragon Child makes you a rare genius? It seems the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy has grown more and more useless in recent years. Don't worry, since you've come, this time, the Dragon Demon Palace will let you experience the taste of what happened a few years ago. With those words, he turned away with a cold smile, and no one dared to stop him. As Mo Xingtian turned around, his eyes shifted towards Mo Xingtian. It seemed like he smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. His eyes, like a stagnant pool, locked onto Mo Xingtian as if he were staring at a corpse. Then, he turned and walked away. Mo Xingtian watched Mo Xingtian's back, a cold glint passing through his eyes. Mo Xingtian was indeed a ruthless figure, the number one on their Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy's bounty ranking. The feeling he gave off was much more menacing than the Devil Dragon Child.